Good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Madison. I'm the Executive Director of SAES. Good afternoon. I'm joined by Mary Catherine Duffy, our Director of Professional Development. MK, good afternoon.
Hi, everyone. So glad to be here. This is a fun topic. I'm excited to talk about it.
This is a fun topic. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to talk about and share thoughts on a dynamic annual fund. So before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, you will have access to a recording of this webinar as well as all the webinars that we've done this year in the webinar library. You can find that on our website under the resources tab. You'll need your login credentials to access that. If you have misplaced your login credentials or need login credentials, just contact our home office. Pat Blevins will make sure that you're able to access that and watch the recording of this and all of the webinars that we've offered this year. The second bit of housekeeping is the Q&A box. So the Q&A box is the primary way you'll communicate to us today. So as we're working through the materials, if questions pop up, if you want some clarification, if you want to throw a question at us, please do so in the Q&A box. And let's take that for a test drive just to make sure everyone can access it and that it's working. If you'll click on the Q&A box, most of the time it's down here. It sometimes is up at the top, but most of the time it's somewhere down here. It says Q&A. If you'll punch on the Q&A box and type in the city that you are joining us from, that will allow us to make sure that the Q&A box is working. And we have got some things that are coming through. And let's see, Alan, you're in the chat function, not the Q&A. That's fine. We'll watch both of those, but just FYI, move over to the Q&A as opposed to the chat, Alan. But everything is working well. So again, welcome so much to everybody. Welcome. And Mary Catherine, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for participating in this. We know it's a little bit of a crazy time right now, but this is such an important topic, and it's really one of my favorite, because the annual fund in my career, my time at St. Albans, it revolutionized the way I thought about fundraising for our school. And when I started at St. Albans, I didn't really know what that was. So it really has made a difference, and I'm excited to share with you just some things that I have learned over the years. So let's jump right into today's agenda. We're going to talk about 4 different phases of preparation and getting ready, and having kind of walked through the whole timeline of what the annual fund does, like a calendar. But before we do that, we're going to start with talking about making the case for your annual fund. Then we'll go into preparation, educating, making the actual appeal, and then following up. So let's jump right in and talk about the case for giving. One of the things that people sometimes fail to do when they're doing an annual fund is to actually make the case for why an annual fund is necessary. And there's 4 things that we would look at in that. Number 1 would be to consider your donors. What is their why? Tell the story of your school. Answer the question, what for, why now, who benefits from this, and then be willing to show results. The idea around giving is hard because, when I started at St. Albans, it feels like that we had a very different approach to giving with our constituency. We had different, people were givers a little bit more. Today's parents, not to shoot down millennials, but millennials think differently, and most of our schools are dealing with millennials. And the idea around giving is, and the way they see giving is different than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And so it's really important as a school that we be willing to make that case and be willing to talk about what it is we're asking you to do and why we're asking you to do it. So let's
Mary Kath, let me throw out one resource that's relatively new on this topic. So NAIS, you may have heard me talk about something called jobs to be done theory. Jobs to be done theory is an interesting approach that they've used with some market research to try to figure out, why do independent school parents, quote, hire, unquote, an independent school? Why do they hire our school? Why do they select our school as opposed to the tons of different options that they have? And they boiled that down into a report that identified the 4 major jobs that parents are hiring our schools to do. Recently, they've done a jobs to be done type study on donors, and they're trying to explore, okay, the donors that decide to give to our schools, why are they doing that? It's a great article.
Okay.
If you just Google NAIS and jobs to be done donors, you can access that. But that's something to consider as a resource when you're doing that first step of developing the case for giving, because that's really what you're asking, is trying to figure out
Right.
what is the donor, quote, hiring, unquote, us to do when they share their donor dollars with us. So it's an interesting resource
Exactly.
that's relatively new, that if it's not on your radar screen, I'd recommend that our schools take a look at that.
That's a great resource. And that actually goes to the next slide, which is who are our donors? Because different donors have different reasons why they want to be a part of the annual fund. You have in my school, at least, we had four main characters of donors. We had, of course, parents. They benefit directly from the giving because their kids are at the school. Then you have alumni, and alumni see it differently. They're not at the school anymore. They don't have kids at the school necessarily. At least some of them don't. And so you'd want to focus on what the school meant to them when they were students. So if you've got parents, then it's easy. It's an easy understanding of why they would want to give, because their kids are benefiting. Alumni, they would be giving, probably their why would revolve around what they had gotten from the school at their time there, what it had meant to them. Then you've got parishioners. If you're a parochial school, this is a unique place to ask about why, because parishioners of a parochial school have a tendency to they believe, in the healthiest schools, that the school is an outreach of the church. And so there's a real opportunity with parishioners to understand that they give to the school because they care about that outreach. So that would be their why, as opposed to maybe they don't have kids at the school, or maybe never did, but they do view the school as an outreach. And so that's a good why. And then, of course, grandparents. Grandparents want their grandkids to be successful. And so that's their why. And so as we think about our donors and making the case to our donors, and there's probably others, there's the friends of the school. Some of those might be alumni, or some of them might just be people who care about the school because it brings value to their community. And so, I think that I had a couple of people on my board at times that were not necessarily had ever had kids at the school, but they cared about the school because they knew the value that it brought to the community. So the different donors matter, and their reasons for giving matter. And so you have to kind of know that. So then the next step is to answer some questions, or I'm sorry, tell the story of the school. I missed that. So telling the story of the school, basically the story of all of our schools are the children. And that's the good news is that it's easy to sell kids. It's easy to be able to talk about and tell a story where kids are benefiting from the dollars that you're giving. What we're doing for those kids, and how that will then be a chain reaction for them to go out and do for the world, is a great story to tell. We're building leaders for the future. We're creating people who are going to go out there and do things that will matter in the world and make an impact in the world. Those are easy stories to tell. So the next step in that process of making the case is to answer some questions. One of my biggest, I think, frustrations around the annual fund was often really just getting people to understand what it is we were doing. And so it's going to be really important, especially if your annual fund is new. If you've never done one before, you're going to have to be prepared to answer questions about why, because a lot of schools are still doing fundraisers that are wrapping paper, cookie dough, small fundraisers like that, where they just fundraiser all year long. This is a little bit different approach, where you just basically do a fall annual fund and you're asking for people to give gifts of any amount, and 100% of that goes to the school. And so when you start to answer those questions, people are going to ask, well, what is my donation going to be used for? Who's going to benefit from my donation? Why now? Why are we doing this now versus in the spring? And a simple kind of tactical question: how can I give? Can I give as a pledge? Can I give? And we're going to talk more about that. But there will be a lot of questions if you are beginning the process of an annual fund. One of the things that I learned is that the longer I did it and the more successful I was each year, the fewer questions I had to answer about it. And so don't think that you'll have to necessarily make the case. You have to make the case every single year, but don't think that it's going to be as hard in year 10 as it is in year 1, because once you've made the case successfully in year 1, 2, and 3, then the case begins to make itself. And then finally, the next step in making the case is to show results of success. I think that people need to know that you did it. And so after your first year, you'll have results from what you did in previous years. And so one of the ways that I did that is in my annual fund letter, which I'm going to talk about it later in this webinar, is I would talk about what we did last year. What were the percentages of participation? What did we do with that? What were the stories of some of the beneficiaries who benefited? Making the stories personal. I think people always want to hear, hey, last year we raised $50,000 in the annual fund and we were able to build an entire playground for this with that money. And here's some quotes from some of the kids who've been playing on the playground about how they feel about their new playground. That's an example of a story of the beneficiary. And then pictures of success. People love pictures. So pictures of equipment that's been purchased, pictures of kids using new curriculum, pictures of facilities upgrades, anything that you can do to show success will benefit you as you go into the next year. So making the case is critically important. In the big picture, in the 50,000 square foot view, we got to make the case first before we can get down and start to really be tactical about what the steps are. So let's then go into phase 1 of this, and that's preparation for the annual fund campaign. I will tell you that as I started to do this, I did not begin the preparation this early. I didn't know that you should begin the preparation this early until I was lucky enough to visit All Saints Episcopal School in Fort Worth, where they taught me. I met with the advancement people there, and they were like, well, we started in May, and even April, we start kind of developing our plan for the next year. And I was stunned. I didn't usually start until August, but once I started preparing like this, it was a game changer for me as far as trying to get it all done, especially since we started talking about it in the beginning of school, which is typically a crazy time for heads. So we're going to talk about preparation 1. So let's talk about the steps of preparation. There are 4 primary tasks that we want to look at when we're getting prepared for the annual fund. And the first one is to create an annual fund leadership team. The second one is to create a logo, marketing collateral, that would be a brochure or cards or anything that you're going to send out, and then educational materials. And we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about this, but these are things that we're thinking about in late April, early May. Creating a video, this takes time, and we're going to talk about what a good video looks like and when that goes out. But the reality is that taking the time to do a video and that would kick off the annual fund and explain a little bit about what you're doing takes time. And so that's why doing it in May. It also takes kids and people, if you're going to put pictures of kids in there or video of kids, and that's hard to do in the summer when there are no kids. So doing it in late April, early May is good. And then creating a timeline of events and tasks. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So it's really important that you do all of these things and to begin in preparation, especially as you move into the summer. So let's look at, let's first of all look at we're going to talk about the leadership team in just a minute, but let's skip over and look at the logos. These are some logos that I pulled up. Of course, this is the one that we did it at St. Albans, and truthfully, I found something similar to this on Pinterest. I think it's really easy to go on Pinterest or look at any Google. You can just Google annual fund campaign. That's what I did here, and you can see that that these are logos that talk about the annual fund, and I like them because they're colorful. They are they're cheery and happy, and they make you, and one of the things that they do, and if you'll think about it from a marketing perspective, every time you see the logo, you're reminded about it. And so using an annual fund logo that's different from the school logo, I think is important. I always had an annual fund logo. Now, sometimes I used it 2 years in a row. I did have a graphic designer create it because that wasn't really my gift, and you don't have to do that, but it's important that it's updated and it looks fresh, because that's what people like, and it's part of marketing. Let's go to the next slide, and we're going to look at an annual fund video that I found that's a great sample. And I want to, this is from Exeter College. So there are a couple of things that I like about that video that I think you should take into consideration. Number one, it's not very long. People will lose interest if it's too long. It's clearly not, anyone could make that. It's pretty simple. If you have a good iPhone these days, you can make things pretty easily. It's easy to watch. You can even add in pictures with this. I think it's really important if you're going to think about a video. I don't think you have to make a video every year. I didn't make a video every year, but making a video does get people's attention, and it does do a good job of educating. And so I liked that one. And I think you could Google, I mean, honestly, I Googled samples of annual fund videos, and you can find all kinds of samples. Some of the ones that we did were around that we used also as marketing videos, and some of them we just did interviews with kids, and that sort of thing. So it can be any number of ways, but I do think a video every other year at least is a good way to get people's attention and change it up. So let's go to the sample timeline. So we've talked about creating the leadership team, and the leadership team really should have a variety of people. There were years that I had what we called a full annual fund cabinet, where I had a parent chair, and we had grandparents and alumni and parishioners, all of whom were on that. And it, you know, kind of depends on the year and on your volunteer pool. But if you can create a team that represents a lot of the constituencies, then that's going to be helpful to you. So when so you'll see this Promise Fund timeline. All I did was I created an Excel spreadsheet, and I did what I was going to do each month and what the task or event was going to be, who was responsible, and the status. And that just helped me in terms of the way I thought I needed to have things month to month. So I knew I had some tasks that I knew I had to get done. If you'll notice in May is really when I put the cabinet together. We called our annual fund the Promise Fund, and you can call your annual fund anything you want. Ours just happens to be the Promise Fund. Some people will do an Invest in the Best Fund or the Eagle Fund or whatever. But however you do that, you need to be sure you're marketing that and that people know what you're talking about. But when you create your cabinet, be sure that you include a constituency that represents every area, because these are the people that are going to help you write letters that we're going to talk about in a minute. Okay, so that is the preparation phase of annual fund. The next phase is the education piece. And this is absolutely critical, and it takes place primarily in August. And let me say this, this is the calendar timeline that I did. September seemed to be the best month for me to do the annual fund. People were freshest in September. That's just the way it worked for me. If you want to do it in October, that's your call. Most annual funds take place in the fall. And so that's why I've got these dates, but you don't have to do them exactly the way I've done them. This is just the way I did it. So let's jump in and talk about steps for education. So the education piece is absolutely critical, and it begins in August with presentations to your board and your faculty. One of the reasons it begins with that is because you want them to get on board right away. And so when you are sending out your brochures and really kicking it off in September, you've got everybody on the board and the faculty on board. It's also a time that you would want to kind of solicit leadership gifts, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. Your back to school events, your new parent events, these are all great times in which to do education on the annual fund. What is the annual fund? Why do we do it? What's the story of the annual fund? It goes back to making the case. This is when your annual fund kickoff video would go out. You may use it as just education, or you may use it right before you send out the brochure. This is when you're educating people on frequently asked questions. I always did a frequently asked questions email for the annual fund. What is it? Why do we do it? What do we use it for, etc. Those can be emails. Those can go back. Can go in Backpack Express, but they need to be sent out and sent out regularly. So let's talk about the board and faculty. So the reason that I did board and faculty education right away was because it was critical for me that to get 100% participation from the board and the faculty before I send that out to the larger constituency. This really matters. And I always tried to get the board to understand what the fund was for a couple of reasons. Number one, because I wanted them to give, and I wanted them to give first, because they're the leadership of the school. And I felt like that was really important for the constituency to see, hey, the whole board is giving, but also so that they could sell it themselves. So if the board says, is not giving, and they don't really understand even what it is, it's going to be very difficult to get high participation from the rest of the community. And so usually at the board meeting in August, which was usually right after school started, I would do an annual fund presentation, and I would present a letter and a pledge envelope to each board member. And so by the end of that meeting, they not only knew clearly what the annual fund was, what we used it for, but they knew that they were expected to give on some level. Now, I say this all the time, the board, I'm not asking for every board member to be a leadership giver. They can give whatever they want to give. The key is 100% participation by the board. And that's true of the faculty. And truthfully, I got 100% participation from my board and faculty every single year that I educated them. And they don't have to give a large gift. They just have to give a gift, because that sends a message to the constituency. Not having 100% also sends a message. And so I think the first message is really what we want to send. The next step is a leadership event. And I think, I didn't do this every single year, but I did it a couple of years because it was really important for me to begin the process of cultivating leadership gifts intentionally. And so what I mean by a leadership gift is anybody in my school, it was a leadership gift was anybody that gave over $1,000. And so those are the people that we focused on in terms of giving leadership gifts. And again, what you want to do before you're sending your brochure out in September to the whole community, it would be great if you could in that letter say, hey, not only have we already raised X amount of dollars from the board and the faculty and leadership, but we've already gotten 100% participation, and we're already at $20,000 to our $100,000 goal. If you can have a amount of money that you've already raised kind of in a silent phase, if that's what you want to call it, before you even send that out, that sends a strong message. And so the leadership event is one where you would provide or invite people, leadership givers, people who would be willing to give a big gift, board members, faculty members, alumni, anybody that you feel like would be able to give a big gift. I did it at a board member's home. That board member was a big giver, and they talked about why they give, and they talked about, and then I had an alumni speak, and I even had a faculty member talk about what the annual fund means to them. And then we gave out pledge cards, and then we did some follow-up. And so the other thing that we did with these leadership gifts, which is we'll talk about in a minute in terms of signage, is we did a banner at all of our drop-off areas for all the leadership givers. And so if you gave a gift of $1,000 or more, you got your name on a banner. And that seemed to be really a popular thing. I don't know if other people are doing that, but it seemed to be really something that people got excited about. So leadership givers should be given, again, thanked. Everybody should be thanked, and we're going to talk about that too. But that leadership event is important. I don't know that it's necessary every single year, but I do think it's an important way to start out cultivating leadership gifts. The other consideration when you're educating is this idea of frequently asked questions. These are questions that you find people asking you in the hallway. What are we doing? Why are we giving this? Why do we have to give? So I like the idea of sending out a frequently asked questions, like maybe the very first part of September. Hey, the annual fund's coming. Here are some things you should know about the annual fund, why we do it, how to give, what to give, what's the average, what do we use it for? This again is just more opportunity for you to make your case. And then again, we've talked a little bit about the video. I always try to do a kickoff video right before, or a kickoff email right before we began the annual fund. It focuses on how much has already been raised, what percentage has already been given. And I think that just helps people go, oh gosh, everybody's doing this. This is an important thing. So David, do you have any thoughts about any of that's different than at your school?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the leadership event, we tended to do an annual leadership event. Did I hear you say that you don't
Yes.
do an annual leadership event? We tend to do an annual leadership event. That may just have been a preference, but we tended to always have new chairs of the annual fund.
Right.
And so with new chairs of the annual fund, which was typically maybe one, maybe two couples that would kind of chair that, we always had a leadership event to kind of, allow them to assume that role and also to thank everybody for their participation. So that's the only thing that kind of I was thinking about as you were talking, that if you can pull off an annual leadership event of some kind of reception or something, that tends to be, I think, more along the norm of what I'm saying.
I agree. I agree. The challenge for me was to be able to find people. We had a pretty, um, a lot of times we had a small pool of people that would be willing to
Sure,
have that. And
sure.
so, if we ran out of into trouble with that, there were times that we didn't do it. But I would agree with you that having an annual one, um, continually cultivates new big givers. Some people will move into the leadership gift area that maybe weren't there before. And that leadership event, for some reason, I think leadership events offer, people like to be considered a leadership giver. And that having that event and having that special invitation to that event makes them want to give more.
I
It's
agree.
interesting. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the actual appeal. When I talk about the annual fund month, I almost always did it in September. Now it might have been depending on kind of when Labor Day was. Usually I tried to start right after Labor Day. I would send out the kickoff video. I would put up any kind of signage. I would do send out the brochures. Send an email. I did it every way I could do it. I did it email. I did it Backpack Express. I did it on Facebook. We even did it. We did the annual fund on Facebook and put the brochure up. So let's talk about the different steps that you want to take when you're doing your annual fund month. Now, if you do this in September, great. If you decide to do it in October, November gets a little bit far, in my opinion. You're getting a little close to Christmas. It's a challenge to be sure. People seem to be happy in September. December, people don't want to give away their money because they're getting ready for Christmas. So that's why I did September. But some of the steps that you want to think about, again, an appeal letter from a leadership team member to parents. And again, for me in September, I sent out stuff to parents, friends, and alumni. That was my focus group in September. I focused on the parents, any friends and alumni of the school. And I usually had a letter from a parent that went to the parents, and I would have a friend or alumni letter that went to the alumni. So I liked that because it was peer to peer, and it felt like that those letters were helpful. I also usually would put the letter in with a brochure. Now, you have an example picture here that I liked about this school that gave, this is kind of what you might think about what the annual fund is, where the money comes, what the money's going to be doing, how it's distributed. And so I think that that's really important too, is to put something together in your brochure that allows for that kind of information. We did a class contest in that month and always tried to get the kids involved. I will talk about that in a minute, it took me a while to be able to do that. I did a lot of reminders during that month of, oh gosh, don't forget the annual fund. And I wrote a lot of thank you notes. And I can tell you, I did a lot of thank you note handwriting. I hand wrote thank you notes to as many people as I could do.
And I may be old
I don't think I
fashioned.
could.
I still think that's critically important.
I do too. And furthermore, now again, I realized that I run a small school, and so the idea that the head of school could sit and write thank you notes. I did that for my gala too, because the way I see it, I want people to keep giving, and I feel like that just is one little thing that I can do to tell them I see them and I validate what they've done and thank you. So I can't emphasize that enough. Let's go to what does the letter look like from the leadership team? Again, ideally it would be from someone who is on the leadership team that's already given and is making an appeal for their peers to give as well. Parent to parent, this is why I'm giving. This is why the school means a lot to me. We've participated at a leadership level, and we'd like to see you do that as well. That's a lot better message, I think, than having it come from an advancement director or even a head of school. Although there were years that I did write that letter if I was having a hard time getting people to help, which did happen. And this happens in small schools. I mean, some of our smaller schools, I've talked with some of our fellow heads that are like this. They're doing all of the annual fund work, and so this may come from you as a head of school, but that letter kind of is a good way to start. The brochure, I would use lots of pictures, charts, or graphs. I would not use a lot of text. I like this brochure. I thought this was a good one. It's colorful. It's got some graphs. It's got some numbers. It talks about it's got the people on it that were, I guess these are their leadership, maybe people that are doing leadership giving. And it just is, it was cool. I like that. And so the brochure needs to tell the story, charts, graphs, pictures. They're going to look at it pretty quickly. So you want it to pack a big punch. And then to create a way to give online. I think that's going to be really important. I found that once we started doing online giving, then I could continually put the link in every email I sent. So putting the link in the email, so when people see the email, they go, oh, I forgot to give. They can just link it. The more convenient you make it, the better you are going to have participation.
Well, and I would say also, just as a reminder, I mean, that's consistently been highlighted in at least 2, if not 3 of the annual trend books from NAIS, the dramatic increase in the number of online giving options. And we're about to get to the point, we're not there yet, but we're about to get to the point where if you don't have a pretty clear online way for folks to give, then you're going to be left behind.
I
So
agree.
if you have that, fantastic. But think about, being able to give by a text. I mean, that's kind of the area, is being able to have a system set up to where, to donate, type in, the donation amount to what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then that automatically is a $100 donation or $150 donation. Those kinds of online giving pieces, they if you don't already have a strategy on how to take advantage of those things, where it's a click, a scan, or a text, it's time to start talking about that.
Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. The other thing that we did that I thought was pretty helpful, and we did this especially with our faculty, we always offered as a way to give, you can just do it as it's a pledge. You filled out the pledge, and you could have it taken out of your ACH, just like you do your tuition. You could chart. Now, we did do credit card, and we did pay a little bit of a fee for that, but we found that it was worth it. And so that's going to be up to each school to decide if it's worth it. But definitely trying to offer ways to give online is something important. Okay, let's talk about ideas for signage. So we're in the middle of the fund. We've done the letter. We've sent out the brochure. Now we're going to be just constantly wearing people out about it. People laughed at me because I had signs everywhere. I did the leadership gift banner and a thermometer at each drop off. We did reminders. Have you given? I even did reminders of things where whatever was on the brochure, I did some keywords and the logo so that people would be reminded. I did email blasts. One of the things that I did that I thought was really successful is I had teachers, parents, and students write quotes about what they were grateful for about the school, why they loved the school, and I would include that in the email reminders. So that was helpful. We did a class participation contest with incentives for parents and students. And so I will tell you that it took me a long time to get to the place where I felt comfortable doing a class participation contest, because what I did not want is to hear people say, my kid got shamed because I don't have the money to give to the annual fund. And so what I tried to really do, I put it off for a long time, but then when I jumped in, what I really stressed was not what you give. It doesn't matter what the amount is. You can give $10. What I care about is class. I was shooting for participation. And so we would always have a participation goal, for the annual fund and a dollar goal for the annual fund. And I would really emphasize the participation, because if we could get 100% participation from our parents, we would almost always hit the dollar fund, the dollar goal. That's just the way it works. And so I focused on class participation, and I did things like, okay, I talked with the kids and sent it out to the parents. I would send a letter, and I would do it via email too. And it would just outline, here's the class participation rule. We're gonna, any class who gets 100% participation of any amount, all you have to do is give $1 and you get in. We'll get we did a big red bow on the door of the classroom, and we took a picture of the kids, and we announced it every Friday at all school chapel, and the kids got to come up and get their bow, and they loved it. And then they would get an ice cream party and a recess because they hit 100% participation. And so what it did is it created momentum. And in the last 2 years, and I think even this year they did it 3 years in a row, we got 100% participation from our parents. And prior to that, we'd gotten in the 40s, maybe 50s. I mean, it was low. And so I think this class participation contest is really good. The other thing we did is we created so when I was at St. Albans, we did, if you got 100% participation, you got your name in a drawing, and whoever won that got to have a parents' night out where the parents benefited, the kids got to have fun. We did it at the school. We bought pizza, and that was really successful. Last year, I believe they did everybody that gets 100. If the whole school gets 100% participation, the whole school gets a parents' night out, and they did it. And the parents got to drop their kids off at the school for 3 hours. All of the teachers helped participate in that parents' night out, and it was really a cool thing. So any way that you decide to do the class participation, as long as you emphasize this is about participation and not about the size of the gift, it will be helpful. The other thing that we did is we kind of did an end of drive event. So my participation was usually about 4 weeks. And so we tried to do a kickoff at the beginning of September, and then we ended. So we kind of had a deadline that we wanted to get those participation, those pledges in, or the gifts. So you could make a pledge or you could make a gift. It didn't matter. You just had to turn that in, and that would be count. And then we worried about getting the pledges later, because a lot of people wanted to make a pledge and pay it out over a 9 or 10 month period.
When did you do the end of the drive event?
Typically at the beginning of October, and we called it Chillin' and Grillin'. And so the first year we did it, and I'm a logo. I'm all about the logo.
You like your logos, I know.
I do like me a good logo. And I did the logo. I did a new logo for the Chillin' and Grillin' event. But originally what we tried to do is we did an event at night. But the very first year we did it, it got rained out. I mean, we had like massive amounts of rain. So we ended up having to do it in that day. And so then after that, it was so successful that we did a Chillin' and Grillin' day event where we invited parents to come and have lunch with their kids. The kids got to participate and have a great day. We thanked the parents. We also had an opportunity to ask for more giving if we hadn't gotten everybody to give. And it was just a great way to say thank you, and a great way to get another logo.
A little chillin', a little grillin'.
A little chillin', a little grillin'. That's exactly right. And we brought a food truck that day, and or I think we also brought like a snow cone truck. I mean, it was just that kind of deal and the parents loved it. So it was a lot of fun. Okay, so let's go to phase 4, which is now we've appealed to the parents and the friends and alumni. We've gotten, hopefully all the participation. We're almost to our goal. The next group of constituencies that we're going to appeal to are our grandparents, and if you're a parochial school, our parishioners. We're also going to be following up during this time on anybody that has not been given, has not given to the annual fund yet. So the first thing is—
Let's talk a little bit about the follow-up calls.
Yeah, let's talk about
I may be jumping the gun here, but talk to us a little bit about what that looks like, who does those calls, what's the content of the calls, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, this is a hard one, and not everybody does this, but the reality is that the follow-up on the annual fund, and I learned this the hard way, is absolutely critical. In the past, the people that have done those follow-up calls have been the board. The board has helped with that do those follow-up phone calls just to, hey, we're just checking in. We'd like to get to 100% participation. Would love to have you give to the Promise Fund. That's basically the call. I'm not going to tell you that it's an easy call. We didn't have to do it over the last 3 to 4 years at St. Albans because we got 100% participation. And part of that is because we did so much work in the beginning with the leadership gifts and all of that. So, but in the past, it was a hard deal because I would have 30% of the parents have given, and we need to hit our goals. So those phone calls can be hard, and it can be hard to get board members to help. But the reality is, best practice, the board is responsible for the finances of the school and takes a lead role in helping with fundraising. So this can be a challenge, but it's something that's important. David, is that who did it at the bigger school, like at All Saints?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think. It was kind of a combination of a little bit of everything. So let's say we are, when is this? About November-ish?
Probably late October.
So we had
In
a
my school, it
whole,
would be.
yeah, we had a whole annual fund kind of committee that
Right.
was a combination of staff, board members, and non-board member volunteers.
Right.
So at this point, what we did was just basically go through the list on who we had not heard from, and then we
Right.
made decisions individually on who was going to do the reach out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's how
and it can be your leadership team.
And so sometimes it was the head of school. Sometimes it was the division head. Sometimes it was a volunteer, not board member, but volunteer who had a relationship with the person. So we tried to be a little more specialized than, say, for example, the head of school did all of the calls, or the development or advancement person does all the calls, or the board does all the calls. We tried to be a little more specialized. And I mean, it was a big, 1,100 kids. It was a big school, so it took a lot of time. But like you were saying, so we talk about best practices and worst practices. So the worst practice is do the initial appeal and there's never any follow-up whatsoever. That would be worst practice, which some schools probably do. Just do the education, do the appeal, and then whatever number comes in is the number that comes in. I'd say that's worst practice. There has to be some type of follow-up call for a couple of reasons. One, it may be something as simple as they need a reminder. Two, it may be they need to reach out from the school because there's an issue that we're not aware of.
Right.
And so through that follow-up phone call, you're able to collect some information on what's going on. And that's handy information to know as well. So
yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And again, this goes back to your leadership team. You can make decisions together on how that works, and that's definitely a better. What you don't want to do is have somebody following up with someone they don't know and they've never talked to, and that doesn't help. And and I've done all of that. We've done I've made all those mistakes.
And it totally depends on the size of the school as well. I mean, if you're in a smaller school, if you're in one of our schools with 100 kiddos or less than 100 kiddos, then it probably is going to be more than likely the head of school. But you may bring in, depending on on the board's comfort level, I sure would bring in a board member or two to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
If you are in a small school, just because it's a small school does not mean the head needs to do all of this. I would argue the head should not do all of this, and that's even more important in a small school because the head is doing so many other things as well. This is really an area where in a small school in particular, the board can play an invaluable role.
I agree. Okay, let's talk about grandparents and parishioners. Grandparents love to give to schools where their grandkids are. They just do. And we had a great group of grandparents that gave at St. Albans. And it's something that you can do. We typically would send out a grandparent letter with a brochure written by a grandparent of the school sometime in early November, because we had Grandparents' Day in November, and we wanted to send the letter, and then we wanted to have them come and enjoy Grandparents' Day and see what they had done. And typically we would get gifts after Grandparents' Day. Having an annual fund presence at Grandparents' Day is important. So having just a table or some place that grandparents can go, oh yeah, I really wanted to do that. That's good. The parishioner church letters we would do in December, partially because in my school, because we were a parochial school, we did not want to compete with the stewardship campaign that the church was doing, which was typically in October for our church. So we committed to the church that we would do our annual fund in September, and we would not address the parishioners until December. It's just hard to get letters together where they're getting the letter from the church about their pledge, and then they're getting a letter from the school at the same time. And so that was why we did that in early December, and it's especially effective right before the new year. And you can also do parishioner letters in January. I've done them both ways. And then there's the end of year appeal. And that, again, can be we had some donors that almost always waited until the very end of the year to give a big gift because they waited for their accountant to tell them what they could give. And so don't mistake the end of year appeal and forget about it, because most schools are not in school the last week of the year, right? But it's really important that not only do you send something out, but that you be checking the phone and you be checking the mail, because people are giving at the end of the year. So my business manager almost always went up a couple of times before the end of the year to make sure if we got checks that we acknowledged those and we didn't wait 2 weeks. And again, thank you notes. I cannot stress the thank you notes enough. Thank you notes are a silent perk of this, but if you don't write thank you notes, people notice. So I would definitely make sure that you're following up with thank you notes. I would also say that your business manager should be following up with letters as soon as they get the donation letters that we should all be doing. And those say thank you as well. So a lot of times we were giving 2 thank you notes. So that just kind of gets us to questions. I'm not sure if we have any questions about. It's been a lot of information, but I want to be sure that I said everything I needed to say, because this is an important topic for our schools.
So good. So yeah, we're going to just use the rest of the time this afternoon for any questions that may pop up, any points of clarification that you'd like, any ideas that you're maybe thinking about using for the upcoming season that you'd like to talk a little bit about. You can type those in to the Q&A box, or if there's any additional resources you'd like to explore, we'll just use the remainder of the time to take a look at that. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. So to everyone who's watching the recording, thank you so much for participating.
Thank you.